It seems that people are afraid of so many things today, and there are some things we probably should fear, but many of our fears are often irrational. Well, these irrational fears are called phobias. From the freedictionary.com, a phobia is a persistent, abnormal, or irrational fear of a specific thing or situation that compels one to avoid it, despite the awareness and reassurance that it is not dangerous. Well, what is the number one thing that most people fear, and also probably one of the most irrational fears? We talked about it before. Specific polls on people's fears will vary. What is consistently the number one fear, or you might say phobia, of people today, what is it? The fear of public speaking. Is public speaking truly dangerous? Well, not really, although that might be changing in the future. But why do many of us have this fear of public speaking today? The fear of public speaking is truly a phobia by definition. Now, I've been speaking in a church setting for over 10 years now. I've also spoken at meetings, particularly with my previous job. So I guess you could say that I've been speaking in public for over 10 years. Now, some of you might be thinking that Alan, he's fearless. He has no fear of public speaking, right? Well, not exactly. When I was younger, the thought of When I was younger, the thought of speaking in public absolutely terrified me. One day, I was asked to speak by the minister of the church I was attending. Now, I would have turned him down flat, except that I didn't want to think I might be turning down an opportunity to serve God. I didn't want to reject God. I never wanted to do that. But then again, I just knew what would happen. I would get up there in front of all those people and make a complete fool out of myself. Well, I would look funny or sound funny up there. Maybe I'd pronounce some of the more difficult names in the Bible wrong. People might laugh at that. And I suspected that after I spoke the first time, this would probably be my last. And I was okay with that. So I agreed to speak, but warned the minister that he might not like it, but I would sincerely do my best. And I did work hard to prepare for this. Didn't want to take it lightly, of course. I prayed and studied, did some research. I asked others for advice. I even joined the public speaking group Toastmasters, if you know who they are, to try to learn to speak better. I wrote out my message, and I practiced what I was going to say over and over and over again. And you know, this didn't seem all that bad after all. All I had to do was just do this one more time, just this time in the church rather than home. Why was I ever afraid in the first place? How silly of me to have ever been nervous and apprehensive about giving a short message to all my friends there at the church. So how did it go when the time came? I was ready. It was really no big deal. I had this. As I sat there during the hymns and the announcements, waiting to be introduced, I started to get really, really nervous. I'm not exactly sure why, but I did. I was now dreading the moment when my name would be called to speak. That didn't last long. Then I couldn't wait to hear my name called so I could just get it over with. I was really getting apprehensive. I told myself that I'd practice what I was going to say over and over. I just needed to do it one more time. This would be easy. I had my notes in hand. What could possibly go wrong? Then I was announced to speak. As I walked up, I thought, I can do this. I've got this. It'll all be over in just a few short minutes. Turned out to be a few short minutes. But then I reached the top of those stairs. I turned back to face the podium and the congregation. And there was no one else there with me. I was all alone. I had some 70 people looking at me, all giving me their complete attention and waiting to hear what I had to say. Was my content good? Was it something of value? Did I make any mistakes when I wrote it out? Is my tie on straight? Am I wearing a tie? It seemed like a million things went through my mind in the few seconds when I turned and faced the congregation. On top of that, I noticed the technician back in the recording booth. He was giving me a thumbs up as if to say, "We're ready. What are you waiting for?" That only served to remind me that not only had all the people there in the sanctuary watching me, but there was no telling how many people were watching the live stream as well. So was I nervous? I think there has to be a better word than nervous to describe my condition. I was way past nervous. According to my wife, I just read my notes as quickly as I could and stepped down from there. I don't remember exactly what I did, but it took me about half the time to get through my message than it had when I'd practiced it. Now, afterward, I felt terrible. I was embarrassed. I was humiliated. I just felt awful. But I figured I'd never have to worry about it again because no one would ask me to speak again. At least that was some consolation, right? Well, oddly enough, after the service concluded, I actually had a few people come up to me and thank me for what I had to say. Despite what I thought was a terrible delivery, people actually encouraged me to speak again. And if that wasn't enough of a shock, the minister asked me to speak again too. So I did it again. Although I spoke on a different topic, the experience was about the same for me. I was still terrified. I had the same issues as before. Now, I really didn't want to turn God down if he was indeed giving me this opportunity. But I really dreaded getting so nervous and getting so upset that I really dreaded doing this. I wasn't feeling like I was doing a good job. Then one day, I asked a very good friend and brother for advice. And this man was a regular speaker and a very good one too, I might say. He told me that if I wanted his advice, he would try to help. And better yet, he said he knew what my problem was. I thought, great. Maybe he can help me. Why didn't I ask sooner? So tell me, what am I doing wrong? I asked. He said, I think you'll be just fine if you can get over your most serious issue. What's that? I asked. What was the single issue that I should be most concerned about? His answer, vanity. Vanity? He said, yes. If you're more worried about how your clothes look, or that you won't speak as well as others who've been doing this a lot longer than you have, you're worried about how people will perceive you. You're more worried about what people will think of you than what they might actually gain from your message. You're so busy worrying about how you look and sound up there that you don't have time to concentrate on delivering your message and making a connection with the very people you're speaking to. Can you imagine someone saying things like that to me? Accusing me of being like that? What kind of brother in Christ would say something like this to another brother in the faith? Well, a good brother, a very good brother, one who is honest and following our Bibles and doing what they tell us to do, one who is being a good friend and helping me as I was asking him to do. And of course, he was absolutely right. My biggest problem of all was, indeed, vanity. From the freedictionary.com, the definition of vanity reads as excessive pride in one's appearance or accomplishments. Now, I was way too worried about how I looked up there. Again, my appearance. Was my tie straight? Was my coat buttoned right? Is my speech, my vocabulary, my enunciation just as good as all the other seasoned speakers? Was my hair sticking up? After all, I do have a cowlick back there. Happens all the time. But I was more worried about how I looked and sounded than the actual message I was delivering. And that was what was hindering me from doing a decent job of just delivering the message and relaxing while I did so. And despite all that, people still continued to encourage and thank me for what I was trying to do. They hadn't been laughing at me. Well, as far as I know, they weren't, maybe after the service. And they weren't probably counting all the ums and ahs I inserted in my message, and they didn't seem to notice when I left the orange tags on my jacket from the dry cleaners that one time. I hadn't noticed them, but on the recording, they were quite visible when I raised my arms during one of the sermons. But nobody cared about that. They were just listening to the message I was giving. Now, suddenly I felt even worse than before because my good friend and brother was right. But I'll always be grateful to him for pointing that out. So, after this excellent advice from a good friend and brother, and now over 10 years of speaking in a church, am I nervous now when I speak? Yes, I sure am. But it's nothing like it was before. I do take this seriously, and I always want to do the best I can. But I no longer dread it or worry about it. I'm just really thankful that God has given me the opportunity to share His Word with others. Even still, I need to always remember to keep any feelings of vanity from hindering me. Let's go back to the definition of vanity that we read earlier from the freedictionary.com. Excessive pride in one's appearance or accomplishments. Now, note that the definition of vanity is excessive pride in one's appearance or accomplishments. So, what is pride? Well, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, pride is a feeling that you respect yourself and deserve to be respected by other people, or self-respect. There may be something good to be said of pride. When we do a job, we want to do that job well. We should have pride in our work. We don't want to do a sloppy job. We want to try to dress appropriately, maybe bathe more than once a month. We want to do our best to keep God's commandments. So I don't think pride as it relates to doing a good job or dressing appropriately, for example, is necessarily a bad thing. Vanity is excessive pride. For example, I was obviously way too concerned about my appearance when I spoke. But I believe we can also go too far in the other direction. Maybe wearing a dirty, worn-out t-shirt when we speak might be going just a little too far in the other direction. If we define pride as desiring to do well, to be respectful, to do our best at something, I suppose the word pride may not be so bad. Let me read you the second definition of pride from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. The second definition says, a feeling that you are more important or better than other people. He gave two examples. Here they are. One was, they needed help, but their pride wouldn't let them ask for it. The second one was, I had to swallow my pride and admit I made a mistake. Pride can be a very bad thing, especially if it meets the second definition of pride we just read. Now, pride and vanity are related, but they're not exactly the same thing. Pride is often a feeling that we're superior or better than others. Vanity is more of how we feel about how others perceive us, especially when this feeling is excessive. Pride relates more to our opinion of ourselves. Vanity to what we would have others think of us. Now that we have some definitions and some examples of pride and vanity, does the Bible speak of them? Of course. Pride and vanity are two things we really need to be aware of. So today, let's take a look at what our Bibles have to say about pride and vanity. Let's start with the word pride in our Bibles. The word pride is found 49 times in our King James Bible. It's translated from several different Greek and Hebrew words. In the Old Testament, we have ga'on, meaning arrogancy, pomp, swelling. Goba, arrogance, haughty loftiness. Zadon, arrogance. Geva, arrogance, lifting up, pride. Geval, arrogance, haughtiness, highness, pride, swelling. You get the idea. In the New Testament, pride is translated from hyperphania, haughtiness, pride, to o'o, something like that. Inflate with self-conceit, high-minded, to be lifted up with pride, be proud. And eladzonao, easy for me to say, okay. Eladzaniah, got it out. Braggadocio, boasting, pride. The word pride in our Bibles always appears to be a negative thing that we should always avoid. It seems to always indicate excessive pride or being haughty. Very often we can see the word pride in the Bible defined as arrogance. I looked up arrogance in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Here's what it said. is an attitude of superiority manifested in an overbearing manner or in presumptuous claims or assumptions. Keep it in mind. Whenever we're talking about pride here today, we'll be talking about arrogance, being haughty, being puffed up. Let's turn, if you would, to Proverbs chapter 16. Let's take a look at some of these things here in the Bible. That's Proverbs 16, verse 17. Let's see what Solomon had to say about pride. How serious a problem is pride anyway? So again, that's Proverbs chapter 16, and we'll begin in verse 17. Here's what it says. The highway of the upright is to depart from evil. He that keeps his way preserves his soul. Notice verse 18. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Better it is to be of a humble spirit with the lowly than to divide the spoil with the proud. Notice verse 18 tells us that pride goes before destruction. And the word pride here is ga'on, and it means arrogancy, pomp, swelling, as we said before. But we want to stay humble. We never want to become arrogant. As we just read, that leads to our destruction. So, for an example of pride leading to destruction, let's turn to Ezekiel chapter 16. That's Ezekiel chapter 16. We'll go to verse 49. I have a question for us. What was the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah? Anybody know? What was the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah? Usually when I ask that question, I get a very quick response. Let's see if we're right. Ezekiel 16, verse 49. Behold, this was the iniquity of thy sister Sodom. Now, what does iniquity mean here? It's a Hebrew word, avon, and it means evil, it means sin. So, behold, this was the iniquity or sin of your sister Sodom. What's the very first thing listed here as Sodom's sin? Pride. Pride was the sin of Sodom. Let's look at the conditions there in Sodom. What might have contributed to their pride and what resulted from the pride of the Sodomites? Did they go to their destruction as Solomon just told us they would? Continuing in verse 49. What about those conditions in Sodom? We see there was fullness of bread. They had plenty to eat, just like us here in the United States. An abundance of idleness was in her and her daughters. Now, the word idleness here means actually peace and quiet. Okay, peace and quiet. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. Let me read that again in the International Standard Version. It says, your sister Sodom and her daughters were proud. They had too much to eat and too much time on their hands, and they did not help poor, helpless people. Does that sound anything like the United States might have been? Could the United States end up like Sodom did? Let's go ahead and see what happened to Sodom in verse 50. I'm wondering, could the same thing happen to our country if we follow the same path? Verse 50. And they were haughty and committed abomination before me. Now, what's the abomination that's being spoken of here? Well, the Bible doesn't say right here. All we know here is that the word abomination means a disgusting practice to God. That disgusting practice might well be the first answer that popped into some of our heads when we thought of the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah. And just as Sodom did, do we see people practicing anything that might be considered an abomination to God today, right here in the United States? Do we see that anywhere? There are groups today that have pride parades that show everyone their pride. But based on what we just read in Proverbs 16, verse 18, that might not be a very wise thing to do. Let's see how Sodom ended up. Again, this is Ezekiel 16, verse 50. And they were haughty and committed abomination before me. Therefore, I took them away as I saw good. Or as the Bible in Basic English says, they were full of pride and did what was disgusting to me. So I took them away as you have seen. And as we've seen, Sodom was destroyed. Why? Because of their pride and lack of their practices of abomination. Things we're seeing in our own country today. Will we ultimately suffer a similar fate? Individually, those who flaunt their pride might do well to consider Proverbs 16, verse 5. Let's go ahead and turn there if you would. Proverbs 16, verse 5. Let's turn there and see what it says. Another question, do we actually have to commit some type of disgusting physical act to become an abomination to God? Let's see what Solomon has to say in Proverbs 16, verse 5. Everyone that is proud in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Though hand join in hand, he shall not be unpunished. Just having pride in our hearts is an abomination to God. It doesn't matter that we might join hands and march and celebrate our pride together. Pride can set us up for destruction. So no, we always want to remain humble. We want to follow the commandments of Jesus Christ. We never want our pride to delude us into believing that we know better than God does. Let's turn next, if you would, to Ezekiel chapter 28. That's Ezekiel chapter 28. Go to verse 13. Let's check in on somebody else whose sin was pride and see what their fate will be. Now, in the passages we're about to read, some disagree about who God is actually talking to, or talking about, I should say. Now, this seems very obvious to me, but see what you think. Again, Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 13. Who is being spoken of here? You have been in Eden, the garden of God. Well, we're speaking about somebody that's been in Eden. So, who was in the Garden of Eden? Well, God was there, right? Adam and Eve were there, right? Anybody else? Forgetting anybody? How about Satan? Right. Well, I don't believe God's talking about himself in the following passages. And I believe it's clear that he's not talking about Adam or Eve. It only leaves Satan. Starting over in verse 13. You have been in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering, the sardius, topaz, and the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, and the jasper, the sapphire, the emerald, and the carbuncle, and gold. The workmanship of your tabrets and of your pipes was prepared in you in the day that you were created. So this is a created being. Verse 14. You are the anointed cherub that covers. I don't think this describes anybody but Satan, but anyway, let's go ahead. You are the anointed cherub that covers, and I've set you so. You are upon the holy mountain of God. You have walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created, till iniquity or sin was found in you. By the multitude of your merchandise, they have filled the midst of you with violence, and you have sinned. Therefore I will cast you as profane out of the mountain of God, and I will destroy you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. Now here God says he will destroy Satan. Satan doesn't rule in some burning hell forever, nor does he even burn forever in the lake of fire. Satan will be destroyed. But what was the sin of Satan? And what may have tempted him to sin in the very first place? Verse 17. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. The phrase lifted up here is the Hebrew word 1361 in Strong's, gabah. It means to soar. That is, be lofty, to be haughty, exalt, be proud. Satan's problem was his pride. But why was Satan so proud? Verse 17 says it may have been because of his beauty. Continuing. You have corrupted your wisdom by reason of your brightness. The word brightness here, by the way, means splendor or beauty. Satan was corrupted by his beauty. So I'll say that vanity may have played a part here in Satan's fall as well as pride. Let's continue in verse 17. I will cast you to the ground. I will lay you before kings, that they may behold you. You defiled your sanctuaries by the multitude of your iniquities, by the iniquity of your traffic. Therefore, I will bring forth a fire from the midst of you. Now here we see Satan's actual fate. What does God say that this fire is going to do to Satan? It shall devour you, and I will bring you to ashes upon the earth in the sight of all them that behold you. So we see that Satan will ultimately be destroyed. Verse 19. And they that know you among the people shall be astonished at you. You shall be a terror, and never shall you be any more. The word terror here is the Hebrew word balahal. It means destruction, terror, trouble. Well, today, Satan is about destruction. Satan is about terror. Satan is about trouble. But one day, Satan won't be about anything. Satan will be no more, because Satan will no longer exist. But we see here that Satan had a problem with pride. And like the proud in Sodom, he will see his destruction in the future. After seeing what pride can do for us, we really need to watch out for pride. What about vanity? What does the Bible have to say about vanity? The word vanity appears 86 times in the King James. Vanities, the plural of vanity, appears 13 times. And the word vain appears 112 times. That's a total of 211 times these words are found. And in the Bible, like the word pride, vanity always appears to have a very negative connotation. I'd like to look at two additional dictionaries for the definition of the word vanity. Look at dictionary.cambridge.org, and it says, vanity is the fact that you're too interested in your appearance or achievements. The Merriam-Webster dictionary says, it's inflated pride in oneself or one's appearance, conceit. A second definition is listed as something that is vain, empty, or valueless. So vanity is that we have excessive pride in ourselves and or our appearance. And sometimes this is, of course, done in vain. As I said at the beginning of today's sermon, I was letting my appearance, both my clothes and my performance, you might say, become more important than my message the first couple of times I spoke in church. And of course, vanity can also mean that something is of little or no actual value. And sometimes we place far too much importance on it. In particular, the Bible often speaks of those who worship in vain. They do this when they worship God as the heathen did, rather than the way God asks us to. Their worship is in vain or of no actual value. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11. It's Ephesians chapter 4. Let's switch gears a little bit. I'd like to remind everyone that no one understands everything perfectly today, but we are to perfect ourselves. We need to grow toward perfection, and we never want to stop learning and growing. Again, that's Ephesians 4, verse 11. And he gave some apostles, and some prophets, and some evangelists, and some pastors and teachers. So why did he give us these? Verse 12. For the perfecting of the saints, for the work of the ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ. As I said, all of us are still learning today. Our knowledge isn't perfect yet. We're not all in the perfect unity of the faith that we'd like to be. But if we keep learning and growing in Christ, our faith will continue to grow, and we'll zero in on the unity we all desire, verse 13, till we all come in the unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, unto a perfect man, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. One day we will all be in unity in the faith. But today, we all need to work toward that goal. As we just read in Ephesians 4, verse 11, we've been given apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. Now, having said that, we also know we've been warned about false prophets and false teachers. How do we know that we're being taught the truth? We must verify everything with our own Bibles. Even someone teaching something false might prompt us to study and then see if they're right or wrong. And I've learned a great deal from listening to others and then checking them out to make sure that the Bible agrees with it. We should always be like the Bereans to always study the Scriptures to see if what's said is true. Now, if we always do that, what will be the result? Verse 14. That we henceforth be no more children, tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine, by the sleight of men and cunning craftiness, whereby they lie in wait to deceive. Our Bibles are certainly right. There are an incredible number of people out there that teach a lot of false doctrines. Even these false doctrines vary widely, depending on who we're listening to. One person teaches this, another that, and they make it sound really good. So good, in fact, if it was possible, even God's elect would be deceived. Remember, Matthew 24, verse 24 tells us, "For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that, if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect." Verse 15. "But speaking the truth in love may grow up into him in all things, which is the head, even Christ, from whom the whole body, fitly joined together and compacted by that which every joint supplies, according to the effectual working in the measure of every part, makes increase of the body unto the edifying of itself in love." You know, all of us have gifts that we can use to serve and edify one another. At our Feast of Tabernacles, for example, we had people who worked in the kitchen. They prepared and served meals so that we could stay and fellowship after services. After all, this was a feast. Others led music. Some led prayers. Some straightened up things after the service. Many contributed to our Bible studies and gave their testimonies to help us all learn and strengthen our faith. Our speakers all worked hard to bring us messages that were of value. Of course, we always need to remain humble and willing to learn, and willing to abandon doctrine that we prove to ourselves to be false. We never want to get stuck trying to hold on to a false doctrine because of our pride or vanity. Verse 17. "This I say therefore, and testify in the Lord, that you henceforth walk not as other Gentiles walk, in the vanity of their mind." Pride coupled with vanity can cause us to avoid admitting we made a mistake. Remember the definition of pride that we saw earlier? They needed help, but their pride wouldn't let them ask for it. Look, in pride is sometimes a feeling that we're superior to others. Couple that with vanity, we don't want to look as if we don't know as much as everybody else does. So we sometimes refuse to ask for help, or to acknowledge that someone else might be right and that we could be wrong, because that challenges our pride and our vanity. It's the same with many people who have been involved in a specific denomination for a period of time. They want to feel like they are at least as smart or smarter than other people. If they belong to a certain church, for example, that church must be teaching all truth all the time. Otherwise, they could be in error, and their pride and vanity can't deal with that. I'd like to tell you a true story about something that happened to me a while back. I was working on a computer in an office. I was waiting for the computer to finish running some diagnostics. While I was waiting, I was having a conversation with the computer operator, who had nothing to do, of course, while the diagnostics were running. Now, at that time, Easter was approaching. A mention was made of a Friday afternoon death of Jesus Christ and a Sunday morning resurrection. Well, as you might imagine, I just couldn't sit still for that, right? So I casually asked the person about the Friday to Sunday time period. Could they explain how to arrive at the 3 days and 3 nights Jesus spoke of, from Friday afternoon to Sunday morning? What was their answer? Quote, "Sure, I can explain it. We just count any part of a day as the whole day. Friday afternoon, all day Saturday, then Sunday morning. 3 days. Jesus never said anything about nights, just about days." End quote. How did I respond to that? Well, maybe I just should have said, "Oh well," and blew it off. But you know me, I can't do that. I just respectfully said, "You might want to make a note to read Matthew 12, verse 40 tonight when you get home. I'm pretty sure it was 3 days and 3 nights. Well, they responded to me that They said, I don't have to wait till I get home. They pulled a Bible out of their desk and proceeded to turn to Matthew 12, verse 40. They had read it aloud to me. Here's what it says. I'll read it to you. Here's what they read. Excuse me. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. So what do you think happened next? How'd the conversation go after that? Well, it didn't. They immediately closed their Bible and changed the subject. Though they saw this for themselves, they appeared not to want to see it. Now, truthfully, I can only speculate as to why. I know this person has a lot to do with their church. They attend numerous Bible studies, but they obviously didn't want to hear or see anything that contradicted what they were taught or what they thought. Why was that? Look, I don't know for sure in this specific case, but could it be pride and or vanity that made them turn away from something I would have thought they would have found to be very significant? Remember the example of pride given by the Merriam-Webster Dictionary? Had to swallow my pride and admit I made a mistake. Was this person uncomfortable admitting they made a mistake? It would seem so, since they immediately changed the subject and obviously did not want to discuss this any further. Could this have been related to arrogance that the Bible seems to indicate that pride is? Remember, an attitude of superiority manifested in an overbearing manner or in presumptuous claims or assumptions. We obviously had a presumptuous claim or an assumption, since it turned out not to be true. Could vanity have played a part in this? Remember, vanity is inflated pride in oneself or one's appearance. Vanity usually means we don't ever want to look bad in front of anybody else. Immediately changing the subject may have been their way to try to avoid looking bad when they saw that they were actually wrong. They didn't want to believe it either. In fact, they seemed to want to pretend it just didn't exist. And again, all this is speculation on my part. But do we ever let pride or vanity get in the way of doing the right thing? You know, another person came to hear me speak a few times. And like many new people, hearing the truth for the first time, they were ecstatic. They learned the truth about the second resurrection, the doctrine of hell, or the lack thereof. And they were proving these things to themselves too. And I was very impressed with their rapid progress and their zealous attitude toward learning. But they had been in the same church for many years and had many friends there. The last time we were together, they told me, I've learned a lot, and I've proven these things to myself. I'm going to show my pastor these wonderful things. When he sees them, he will embrace the truth and it'll improve our church. Well, I told them this wasn't likely. But they did return to their church, but as far as I know, nothing ever changed there. We do learn something new, proving it to ourselves. If it isn't exactly what our friends believe, or maybe it's something that our churches don't exactly teach, should we forget about it and keep deceiving ourselves, pretending to believe things we've proven to ourselves that we know are not true? Should we go back to the way we were before God led us to this understanding? Something that may not be currently taught in our particular church. Should we go back through the door that was open for us and slam it tightly shut? Many churches teach it's my way or the highway. Should we always go along with them? Especially if we actually have proven something different to ourselves. If we don't totally agree with our leaders, are they tolerant of someone who sincerely believes differently? Maybe if our church leader asks us to participate in trunk or treat, of course that's just Halloween, but another name, of course. If they do we go along with them? Maybe carving pumpkins into some ghoulish shape? Or do we respectfully decline to participate? And if we do decline to participate because we feel it's wrong, do our church leaders respect our position? Or do they ridicule us or try to twist our arms into doing it anyway? Denominational leaders whose doctrines are rigid often use pride and vanity against their congregation to keep them in line. practically forcing them to believe whatever they say. I can just see someone going to their pastor and asking them to explain the 3 days and 3 nights of Christ's death and resurrection we spoke of earlier. Now, for the pastors who still promote the Friday, Sunday scenario, they really only have 2 choices. The first one is to explain it in such a way that sounds good, but of course is not in fact true. I actually heard a pastor try that once. Let me explain that to you. He says to get the 3 nights, he counted Friday night as 1 night. Then he said that God's days begin at sundown, so that the beginning of Saturday was a 2nd night. Then Saturday night made the 3rd night. In other words, he counted Friday night on our calendar, then claimed at sunset began another 24-hour period on God's calendar, and counted what we call Friday night as another night. He counted the same night twice, and then added the actual night beginning at sunset on Saturday. And of course, people just nod their head in approval, right? However, should someone call the preacher on this, he usually has a backup plan. And typically, he will use pride and vanity to stop the questioning immediately. Now, wait just a minute. Don't you have faith? Those with faith can see what I'm saying is true. Now, if the person says they still can't see it, they're being accused of having no faith or weak faith, or maybe being some kind of heretic. What do most people do? They back off. Okay, I think I see it now. Or let me think about this some more. I think you're probably right. And that's the last we ever hear of it. Most people don't want to look bad, like their faith is weak, or weaker than others around them. They don't want to look inferior. So many preachers are counting on our pride and our vanity to keep us in line with what they want us to believe. Rather than help us grow, they stop us wherever we are, wherever they want us to be. They actually stifle our growth in Jesus Christ. It's just like the person I've told you about before, the one that admitted they learned nothing in 60 years of faithfully going to the same church. It's not just churches that use our pride and vanity against us. Politicians and groups do too. If you happen not to agree with a certain group, for example, well, maybe you just don't understand them. Maybe you're just ignorant of the truth. Or maybe you're just afraid or phobic of another group. Obviously, you must not be educated. You're just afraid of what you don't understand. That's all. See how that works? And so people's pride, and especially their vanity, tend to keep them from speaking their minds for fear of looking inferior, maybe less educated. This may not work in every case, but it is a very good strategy. Otherwise, people wouldn't use it. Our pride and our vanity doesn't want to make us look inferior. If others can appeal to our pride and vanity, they can actually manipulate us. Whether in church or in the world, people use our pride and vanity against us. We need to always be on guard so that we never allow anyone to manipulate us using our pride and vanity. Not with our personally held beliefs about the world, and certainly not with what we've come to sincerely believe about our great Creator and His great plan of salvation. So don't get caught in their trap. As the song says, onward Christian soldiers. We know we have a battle on our hands. Let's be victorious. Let's not be done in by something as simple as propaganda and meaningless name-calling. Looking at vanity more specifically, I was talking earlier about speaking in public and just how terrifying that can be. I know it was for me. Different people have different gifts and talents, as we said earlier. Now, I was absolutely positive that I would never be a speaker in church, ever. Some of you may think I'm still not a speaker. Okay. There are people that may not be suited for public speaking. They may have other gifts and talents that they can use to serve God and His people. But those that might consider speaking in church or at a Bible study or anywhere for that matter, I would certainly encourage you to pursue doing just that. As we approach these end times, there are relatively few that are speaking the truth today. Should we be around for the tribulation, many will wonder why they weren't raptured before the tribulation begins. So that's what many are being taught today, even though the Bible says otherwise. Now you check out Matthew 24, verses 29 through 31, and of course this can also be verified in Revelation. We also know that knowledge will be increased as we near the end of the age, and we're certainly seeing that today. But it's not just science and technology. Many people are waking up to the deception that Satan has perpetrated on the churches of today. We need more people to get the word out about God's true plan. People today need to hear from those of us who can offer hope, true hope in Jesus Christ. Not the God that watches most of his creation suffer in hell for eternity, but the merciful God that we know and love. As prophetic events begin to unfold in our near future, many of our leaders will be lost. They won't have a clue. Not the leaders of our country, nor the leaders of our churches. People will begin to look elsewhere for help in understanding what's going on. We need to be there for them. If we're willing and able to help, I think that's something we should seriously consider. But don't lose the battle before it even begins. Don't let Satan, by means of our pride and our vanity, trick us into having a false fear or an apprehension of serving God. Many, if not most potential speakers, have a real phobia about speaking. I believe this can usually be blamed on our vanity. We'll imagine all manner of things that might make us personally look bad, just like I did. Again, if my tie crooked, is my hair sticking up? What if I make a mistake, like I'm doing right now? What if I say something wrong? What then? Well, as human beings, none of us are perfect. I know I've made mistakes before. I'm sure I've made additional mistakes I'm not even aware of. I'll make mistakes in the future. But what if everyone was too afraid they might make a mistake, an honest mistake? What if everyone let pride or vanity stop them from helping to spread God's word? Who would God find it as servants today, to speak today as a witness? We all know that Christ will not return until the message about his kingdom is preached into all the world. Who would be willing to do it? Well, of course, we know there are people doing it today, but the numbers are relatively small. So what if someone studies their Bible, prays that God will give them a message, and then makes an honest mistake? Well, God knows our hearts. He knows if we're sincere. He understands our motivation for serving him. 1 Timothy chapter 3, if you would. We'll start right at the beginning. 1 Timothy chapter 3. If we study, pray for wisdom, and pray that God will guide us, we may not always be perfect, but God will see and appreciate the work we do for him, whether specific people do or not. But remember, pride is so pervasive that here we're told that those who are newer in the faith might not quite be ready to be a leader in the church. Let's take a look at this. 1 Timothy 3, verse 1. This is a true saying. If a man desire the office of a bishop, he desires a good work. Now, I certainly agree with that. But here in 1 Timothy chapter 3, we see some qualifications for our church leaders. Let's look at verse 6 specifically. Who might not qualify to be a church leader according to verse 6? That's 1 Timothy 3, verse 6. It says, not a novice, lest being lifted up with pride, he fall into the condemnation of the devil. Or as the Good News Bible says, he must be mature in the faith, so that he will not swell up with pride and be condemned as the devil was. So we see that pride can be an issue, especially for those who desire to go into the ministry. Our Bibles tell us that we need to be mature in the faith to avoid falling into that trap of pride. Was I mature in the faith when I let pride and vanity almost stop me from speaking? That's a fair question. Perhaps I was still a novice in the faith when I first started to speak. So, isn't it amazing how the Bible's always right? You know, if we just pay attention to it in the first place, it would save us all a lot of trouble. But as long as we study and learn those important lessons, they'll come and we'll be just fine. To conclude today, Pride and vanity are two of our greatest enemies. We saw that pride and vanity were responsible for some serious trouble in our Bibles. Pride was responsible for the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Pride led to the fall of Satan himself, no doubt aided by his vanity, as we're told he is very beautiful. We read that pride and vanity will lead Satan to his destruction, just as it did Sodom and Gomorrah. We need to constantly be on guard that we don't fall into the trap of pride and vanity that can even cause us to stagnate in our spiritual growth. Like the person who refuses to ask for directions because of their pride, some refuse to accept anything new or different about their current beliefs because they're simply not willing to admit they were wrong, or that maybe they didn't know something someone else did. Some ministers, politicians, and groups use our pride and vanity against us. They try to make us look inferior if we don't agree with them, and they're counting on our pride and vanity to be able to manipulate us or silence us even. And in some cases, pride and vanity can stop us cold from serving our Creator. Many otherwise qualified and knowledgeable men will reject the opportunity to serve as leaders, both in the church and their jobs and in society in general, because of pride and vanity. There seems to be no end to the damage we can suffer from pride and vanity, if we allow it. We need to be constantly vigilant that we don't let our pride and vanity do harm to us today, to stagnate our walk with Christ, to stop us from serving as good examples of true Christians, to stop us from being ambassadors of Christ, and possibly even leading to our own destruction, as we saw pride and vanity do to others today. Psalms 25, verse 9 to end today. We've seen examples of what happens to those who yield to their pride and vanity today. That's not something we ever want to do. It's difficult, if not impossible, to grow in Christ if we believe we all have it figured out, if we think we know everything. But on the other hand, what happens if we do reject our excessive pride and our vanity? Say they're gone. Again, Psalms 25, verse 9. Psalms 25, verse 9. It says, the meek, now meek here means humble, of course. That means you're not full of pride and vanity. So we're talking about the humble here. The meek will he guide in judgment, and the meek will he teach his way. As the easy to read version says, he teaches his ways to humble people. He leads them with fairness. God can and will work with the humble. The proud and the vain, well, that may be a different story. I know we all want to be in God's kingdom. So who is it that will inherit the earth? Psalm 37, verse 11 tells us, but the meek, the ones without pride and vanity, the meek shall inherit the earth and shall delight themselves in an abundance of peace. So, let's be careful that we never let pride or vanity keep us from being in God's great kingdom. Let's humble ourselves. Let God teach us in these many different ways and continue to grow to be more like His Son and less like our sinful selves, till the day we find ourselves in God's great kingdom.